My 7-year-old granddaughter grabbed my hand across the kitchen table, looked straight into my eyes, and whispered, "Grandma, don't let them take your house." I almost smiled. She was 7 years old. What could she possibly know that I didn't? But then I saw the fear on her face, not the kind children fake when they want attention. Real fear. Her little hands were shaking. Tears filled her eyes. When I asked who was trying to take my house, she glanced toward the front door and lowered her voice even further. "Mom said you'll forget soon." My stomach tightened, because for the past few weeks my daughter had been saying something strange every time we were together. If I misplaced my reading glasses, she'd laugh and say, "See, you're getting forgetful." If I repeated a story, she'd mention it again. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, getting older comes with little memory slips. But hearing those words from my granddaughter changed everything. I suddenly started replaying every conversation we'd had, every comment, every worried look she gave me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Why would a 7-year-old be so terrified? What had she heard that made her believe someone was coming for my home? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing. Children don't invent fears like that out of nowhere. And that night, after my granddaughter went home, I sat alone in my kitchen and realized something that made my blood run cold. Every single comment my daughter had made about my memory, every laugh, every worried look, every gentle correction had happened in front of other people. She wasn't being careless. She was building a case. My husband had passed away 14 months earlier and left behind a home, savings, and a trust that had taken us decades to build together. I was 67 years old, living alone for the first time in my life, and doing far better than most people expected. I was not confused. I was not declining. I was grieving, and there is a difference. My daughter had always been attentive after her father died, calling regularly, stopping by with groceries, asking about my appointments. I assumed it was love. I never once questioned her timing. The comments started small. One evening, I couldn't immediately find my reading glasses, and she laughed softly and said, "Mom, you've done that 3 times this week." I hadn't. Another time, I mentioned a trip her father and I had taken years ago, and she exchanged a glance with her boyfriend sitting across the table. Later, she said, "You told us that story last week." I hadn't told it before. Not to them, not ever. But I second-guessed myself both times, because that is what you do when someone who loves you gently corrects you. You assume they must be right. You assume your memory is the problem. At the time, I didn't realize it. Looking back now, I think that may have been exactly what she wanted. After my granddaughter's warning that afternoon, I stopped second-guessing. I kept thinking about her face. That wasn't a child repeating something she half understood. She had heard enough, seen enough, to be genuinely frightened. And whatever she had witnessed had scared her badly enough that she felt she had to warn me herself. A 7-year-old shouldn't carry that kind of weight. The thought broke my heart. I began writing everything down, not because I was confused, but because I needed proof that I wasn't. Every conversation, every date, every detail. Then I noticed something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Every single time my daughter corrected me, someone else was there to hear it. A neighbor, a family friend, her boyfriend, even my own doctor at a routine checkup when she mentioned casually, "She's been having some memory issues lately." I had never told her that, because it wasn't true. It was never private, never casual. It was always an audience. She wasn't trying to convince me I was forgetful. She was trying to convince everyone else. And once I understood that, I realized even worse. If she was building a case, she already had a plan for what would happen once people believed her. I just didn't know yet how far that plan had already gone. Before we move forward, I want to ask you something. If someone close to you started making small comments about your memory in front of other people, would you notice it right away, or would you brush it off at first? Let me know in the comments. I didn't confront her. Not yet, because I had learned something important from watching her. She was patient. She was careful. And if I wanted to understand the full picture, I needed to be both of those things, too. So I kept showing up to Sunday dinners. I kept answering her calls warmly. I kept being the mother she thought she had completely fooled. Meanwhile, I contacted a private investigator recommended by a friend and told him everything I had noticed. He listened without interrupting. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. Don't change anything. Don't confront anyone. Just let me work. So I waited. The first thing he uncovered had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with him. Her boyfriend had been drowning in debt for over a year, not the kind you accumulate carelessly, the kind that builds when someone is desperate and running out of options. He had lost steady income and had been quietly pressuring her for months. She wasn't the cold, calculating person I had started imagining late at night. She was a woman who had made herself believe that what she was doing was somehow justified. That made it more painful, not less. A week later, the investigator showed me a folder I couldn't stop staring at. He had found records showing repeated inquiries to elder care agencies and legal offices made over several months, always careful, always framed as a concerned family member seeking general information. Never a name, never anything direct, but the pattern was unmistakable. Someone was building something. I just didn't have the final piece yet. Then my granddaughter gave it to me without knowing she had. She was sitting at my kitchen table doing homework one afternoon when she stopped writing and looked up at me with an expression no child that age should carry. "Grandma," she said quietly, "if somebody tells a lie long enough, does it become true?" I set down my cup very slowly. I asked her what made her think of that. She looked back down at her paper. "Nothing," she said, "just wondering." But her hands had stopped moving and she didn't look up again for a long time. That night, I sat alone and thought about everything I knew and everything I still didn't. I thought about my daughter and how far back this had really started. I thought about that little girl carrying questions she shouldn't have to carry. For weeks, I had been watching their moves and trying to understand them. That night, for the first time, I decided they were about to start reacting to mine. They thought they were quietly building a case against me. What they didn't know was that I had already started building one of my own. I keep thinking about this question, and I genuinely want to know your answer. At what point would you have confronted her? The first suspicious comment, or only after you had solid proof? Tell me in the comments. There is no wrong answer. The first thing I did was schedule an appointment with a doctor my daughter had never met, someone completely outside the circle she had been quietly working for months. I told him nothing about what was happening. I simply asked for a full cognitive evaluation. I wanted an honest result with no outside influence touching it. 2 weeks later, he sat across from me and said words I already knew but needed documented. No signs of cognitive decline, sharp memory, full capacity. He actually smiled when he said it. I didn't smile back. I was too busy thinking about how close I had come to letting someone else define my mental state before I had thought to define it myself.
I brought those results directly to my attorney. What he showed me in return made the room feel very small. He slid a document across the table. It wasn't a guardianship filing, not yet, but it was a formal consultation record created weeks earlier under my daughter's name, requesting information about the legal process for assuming decision-making authority over an elderly parent. She had already taken the first step. She just hadn't taken the second one yet. My attorney told me quietly that if I had waited another 2 or 3 months, I might have been responding to a process already in motion rather than stopping one. I sat with that for a long time. Then I told him it was time to finish this. The meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in a small conference room. No drama, no raised voices, just a table, 4 chairs, and a folder sitting in the center that contained everything we had found. My daughter walked in expecting something else entirely. When she saw the attorney, the investigator, and that folder, she stopped moving for just a moment. Then she sat down. At first, she denied everything. Then she said it could all be explained. Then she looked at the folder again and went very quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't respond, because that sentence told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't planned to stop. She had simply hoped she wouldn't have to see it clearly. Her boyfriend never came to that meeting. The moment the plan collapsed, he was gone. According to the investigator, he left town within a month. She never mentioned him again. I wasn't surprised. Desperate people build things quickly and abandon them just as fast when the cost becomes too high. 3 days later, my granddaughter came to stay for the weekend. She walked through my front door, dropped her bag, and looked around the house the way children do when they're checking that something is still where they left it. Then she looked up at me. "Grandma, you're not leaving your house." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere." She smiled for the first time in months. Not a polite smile, not a relieved smile, the kind that starts in the eyes before the mouth catches up. I pulled her close and held on longer than usual. A few weeks later, my daughter called and asked if we could have dinner together. I said yes. We talked carefully, the way people do when they are relearning how to be in a room together. When she offered to drive me home afterward, I thanked her and took my own car instead. She watched me go without saying anything. I think she understood. Looking back, the bravest person in this entire story wasn't the attorney, the investigator, or even me. It was a 7-year-old little girl who loved her grandmother enough to speak up when every adult around her had chosen to stay silent. Before I go, I want to ask you something. Do you think trust can ever fully come back after a betrayal like this, or does some part of it stay broken forever? Let me know what you think in the comments.